hi, welcome back or welcome to my channel. If you're new, my name is Laura. Hi, hello, welcome. Today we are going to do a video that I've seen a couple other people do already, and it's been floating on my to-do list to film this video for quite some time, and I just had other things that I wanted to do. Yeah, that's really it. But we are going to be swatching all of my favorite shades in every palette that I own, and I have a list here because I'm extra. I have 37 eyeshadow palettes that I am going to be swatching colors for. I am kind of switching things up from my video. I am going to do the brand singles, and I'm counting those as a palette. So ColourPop singles, since I did build my own palette, I am considering that a palette in my collection. Same thing with some of the indie brands that I've bought, Looksy, Glaminatrix, Dandelions Company, and Kristen Lee. I have those as a palette because it makes sense in my head to count them in that way. I did get inspiration from Sarah Rose, Sophie Alexandra, and Rebecca Morgan was the last one that I saw do this kind of video. So I will have their channels listed down below in the description box. I hope you guys check them out. And without further ado, let's just get into this because there's a lot of things to swatch. I already I prepped and I have swatch clips already. So I already know every shade. That's why I wrote them down, because I'm we need to stay on target right now. But I have a big old sack of eyeshadow palettes. There's so many in here. So I'm going to go down my list. That way the swatches just make sense. The first couple of palettes we're talking about are my ABH palettes. I have the Subculture, which is my pride and joy, and the Prism, which I thought was a great companion palette to the Subculture. So we're going to start with Subculture. And in that, my favorite shade in this palette is actually New Wave here. Beautiful, beautiful, Kraft mac and cheese. Probably shouldn't ingest this kind of color, but we so often do. But that is my favorite color in this palette. It's so dreamy. I love a good orange shade like that. Just so beautiful. And then my second shade is actually one of my favorite shades in my collection, which is weird because it doesn't look as loved as a lot of other shades, and that comes from the Prism palette. Clearly I've been waving this around for a good minute, but my favorite shade is actually not one that I've already hit pan in. My favorite shade in this palette is going to be Dimension here. It's so beautiful. It's a lavender pewter, it's gorgeous. I absolutely love that shade. I need to reach for this palette more. I would like this palette to look as used and abused as my Subculture palette, because this is a fairly easy formula to hit pan on. But I'm thinking I'm going to do Subculture as a pan that palette next year. Let me know your thoughts on that. This would be a strong other contender just to hit pan in every shade, whereas Subculture I would want to finish every shade. So let me know your thoughts. Then we go to my Tartist Pro palette. This palette is in my Pan Those Eyeshadows series. It's a beautiful palette. This actually was probably my introduction to color because of this pinky row, this purple, and these oranges. And then if I always wanted a staple look, I could go, this is so reflective, I do apologize. This staple row of just neutral browns. But I used to travel with this palette. I love this palette. It still smells lovely. I absolutely love this palette. My favorite shade is actually Indie, a really boring, basic, cool-toned, neutral brown. I love that shade. I just feel it's so unique in my collection. I don't have too many. It almost leans purpley. It's just so unique to me. I love that shade. And you can, all of that tart embossing is totally gone off a lot of the writing on these shades, because I have gotten quite a decent amount of use out of it. Every time I've traveled, I've brought this to Japan with me. This is one of my tried and true kind of palettes. Love this one. Then we have the slew of Juvia's Place palettes. So we're going to start with my Magic palette here. It was very easy for me to pick my favorite shade in this one, which is very surprising. I don't think that most people would think that this would be my favorite shade, but Faso. That shade is just so pretty. I love it. I wore this shade to my father-in-law's wedding. So I wore that to his wedding a couple years ago, and I absolutely love it. That's such a beautiful shade. So gorgeous. I need to reach for that more. I don't wear purples. As we know, I really don't like purple eyeshadows, but I have quite a few purples in this, which is so bizarre. It's just weird. So we're going to go into my Masquerade palette next by Juvia's Place again. And my favorite shade is going to be this guy here called Dahlia. It is just such a luscious, deep, like Caribbean ocean blue. It is so beautiful. I'm so intimidated to wear that kind of shade, but it is so stunning. I did have a really pretty eye look that I did incorporate that in. I've actually incorporated that into a couple looks recently, so I am really happy to get more use on that shade because I'm always drawn to it but never really want to reach for it. Just that shade is like so intimidating to me, but it's just so beautiful. It's so good. We go down and the next palette is the Zulu palette. Sorry, I'm looking down at my piece of paper, but we go to the Zulu palette next. And this one was almost a little difficult because I love these kinds of shades, this one and this one. I'm always drawn to those kinds of shades, but I did pick this beautiful green. It's just so stunning, and it's just so, I'm like staring at it. It's just so, so good. That it's just such a dreamy, like an apple green. It's just beautiful. I absolutely love it. Then my number one palette by Juvia's Place in my collection is my Saharan, and it was very easy. I've ranted and raved about how much I love this shade, Wodabi, so much. It is like the perfect like olivey gold. It's just so good. I have a huge dent in it. I hope you guys can see, and like the ring light is showing it justice. This shade here is in my pan, those eyeshadows, FYI. No pan yet, as you can see, but this shade is just so good. It's just so good. I love it. Then we go to the Nubian palette. This one does not have shade names either. My favorite shade, this was easy for me, it's this one here. It's almost like a chunky, beautiful, metallic, champagne-y kind of color. Absolutely stunning. I absolutely love that. My palette is looking a little, like you can see there's some oils kind of like coming out of that shade. That doesn't alarm me. The shadow smells fine. It performs fine. It's not alarming. I had a Kaleidos palette that came and it had that from the rip kind of thing, so that doesn't really bother me or hinder me from using this, but I don't use this palette enough, and it's a shame because this is so beautiful and I need to reach for this more. Another one of my favorite Juvia's Place palettes is the Saharan too. I just really love the Saharan palettes. There's just something about them that is so special to me, and I was really torn on this palette because I love the shimmers throughout this whole palette. The only one that I'm like kind of meh about is that one. These two are probably my favorites. Obviously, this shade I'm always drawn to. I ended up picking Aziza, this one here. It's just a really pretty, really light, almost white shade, but it has like a really intense, like goldy orange shift to it. Absolutely beautiful. These two together, like paired, is one of my favorite eye looks that I ever do, or these ones, and then like whatever matte is in the crease. Absolutely love this palette. Again, another beautiful, beautiful, beautiful palette by Juvia's Place. Then another one of my favorites is the Deuce palette. This is no longer sold anymore. It is discontinued, which is a crying shame. If you can get your hands on it somehow, I definitely recommend it. There are a few color stories similar to this. Yeah. I hit pan in that one last year, which was really fun, but this guy, Macaron, is my all-time favorite shade. I'm always drawn to shades like this. Absolutely beautiful. Just a stunning, stunning palette. Love you. I have the second Warrior palette. I did not purchase the first because I have too many tones like that in my collection, but the Warrior 2 I picked up because it's all matte, and I figured this would go really well with like all shimmer palettes that I have in my collection, or just in general. It's a great staple matte palette, and I feel like I surprised myself, but whenever I reach into this palette, I always love this shade here, which is called Kana. I love this shade. It's just like a nice, cool toned, like neutral brown. Really great for transition work. It's just a staple in my collection. Yeah. Okay, then we have a slew of singles that are either depotted shades, they're singles, or what have you. So I have them all in here. I'm not going to share this whole thing with you yet. I'll go shade by shade, keep you waiting, keep you guessing for a minute. So we're going to start with my Looksy singles, and I have a decent amount of Looksy singles. I have, I think, maybe 14, 15 shades, but my favorite one is this guy here. It's a beautiful, like, lavender with, like, gold in it. Very unique to my collection. Really reminds me of the Dimension shade, but this one's a lot lighter. less impactful, more gold than Dimension, has silver in it. Absolutely beautiful shade. I don't know if you can get that one from Looksy anymore. I had depotted some of my Bare Minerals palettes, duos, quads, and I only have 8 shades left from them. And I decided to pick this guy here. This is just a really beautiful, like, I don't even know, like, tealy green. It's just so unique to my collection. I really, really love it. It's so pretty. It's just so good. I just really, really enjoyed that. The next palette is Depotted. It was my James Charles palette by Morphe, and the shade that I ended up picking for that is this guy here. A beautiful, beautiful, like, acid green kind of shade. This is the shade Social Blade by the Morphe James Charles palette. This has such a soft formula. Unlike some of the other shades in that palette, this one was definitely more of the blendable soft formula. Some of the shades were just not as good as this kind. Then we take a break from my singles and we go into a palette that was actually featured in my full face of least favorite makeup products, or just my least favorite makeup product. They're not necessarily all bad, I just don't reach for them kind of thing. So this is one of them. I do like this. It's just, it has a lot softer of a color payoff than I prefer. This is really good for people that don't want a whole lot of color. They just kind of want one soft sweep of color on their eye. I'm not that kind of person. I really like to cake it on, but my favorite shade in this palette is this guy here. They don't have shade names. They're labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. I just like shade number 2 in this. It's just a soft, like, rosy bronze kind of shade. I really like that color. It's again, it's very light, it's very soft. Okay, we're jumping back to the singles very quick because this is a Depotted shade from my Morphe 35M Boss Mood palette. That beautiful, beautiful palette. They had, like, the top 2 rows, those gorgeous greens, a couple orangey tones, and then, like, cranberries and purples, and we all know purples are not my thing. Really thought I would have picked a green, but I did not. I picked this shade here. It's called Bright Eyes. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous orange shade. It almost has green specks in it. They're like goldy green, like glitters inside of this shade. This shade just performs so beautifully. I did a duping the Tribe palette video with Haley on this one. This was featured in it along with, I think, actually Social Blade, which we just talked about. So it's funny how, like, some of the same shades made it into this cut. But I absolutely love this shade. I think it's absolutely beautiful, and it's so creamy and it's so just good. It's just so good. So really, really love that shade. Okay, now we're going to go into a spoiler for my Pan Those Eyeshadows. Whatever, it is what it is. I already posted a spoiler on Instagram. If you keep up with I am being more active on Instagram. Just letting you know, if you want to join the cutie family on Instagram, I will have my Instagram link down below. I have been so much more active on it, so if you want to catch up with my day-to-day, like things that I'm doing, products that I like, etc., maybe some spoilers like I'm going to show you right now, follow me on Instagram. But this is my Take Me Back to Brazil palette. I have this in my Pan Those Eyeshadows now twice. My favorite shade is not one that I'm panning. My favorite shade is this guy, this, like, nuclear green yellow. Absolutely gorgeous. Love this kind of shade so much. And this one, that shade in particular, is probably the best performing in my opinion in this palette. I think it's so good. It's just good. Then we go to my Creepy Cute palette by Strobe, now Shroud Cosmetics, previously known as Strobe Cosmetics. I had this in a project that I did last year on Instagram with the shade Strawberry Milk. My favorite, though, is Take a Hint. This, like, again, another green. Really tied for, like, these two. Something about this, it's just so pretty. Something wrong with my shade, though. I feel like it got hard pan pretty quick, so we need to do the duct tape, or the duct tape. Can you imagine duct taping an eyeshadow? The Scotch tape trick. And seeing if I can get the hard pan off, because that shade is so beautiful and I need to use it more. I'm, like, annoyed at myself for not using it more. I'm annoyed at myself for a lot of these because I don't use them as much as I want to, and the shades are so good. The next comes my Fun Size palette. Again, an underutilized palette in my collection, and I had to have this last year. I just had to have it. Had to. I think it's more nostalgia because of, like, the theme of the palette is 8-bit and, like, video games, and I am a nerd and love that kind of stuff. So This is what that guy is looking at, and my favorite shade in it is actually the shade 8-bit. It's that beautiful deep periwinkle. It's just so good. It's so beautiful. I love that shade. Super unique to my collection. A lot of these shades are unique to my collection. I know the Creepy Cute looked very, very similar. Creepy Cute is actually a lot more light and pastel than this guy. This one is definitely more depth into it. So really love this palette. Need to get more use out of these. Like, it's annoying. We hop back to singles. So my ColourPop singles that I have, I bought quite a bit when I did purchase my BYOP a year ago. I bought a lot of eyeshadows, but I think my favorite shade, and like looking at it, this is the shade that always catches my eye when I am looking at my ColourPop singles. It's hard to deter which one's which, but the shade here, this is ColourPop Trooper. I do have Paper Tiger and Trooper, which are almost the exact same shade. I prefer Trooper slightly more. It's slightly more yellow than Paper Tiger, which is a little tiny bit more mustardy, orangey. Same shade, but like a tinge different. So we are going to talk about the Mini Nude first. That is this little 5-pan. She's so cute and little. Not my favorite formula. Natasha Denona shimmers are not my favorite formula. However, in this palette, this guy is actually my favorite, which is ironic because it's another shimmer shade. This one, it's just so pretty on the lid. Like, it's just super, super reflective, super metallic, really, really gorgeous shade. I find out of the shimmers in that, as I just dug my finger into this. That was like $1 worth of eyeshadow, I bet, that I just like dug into my finger. That's annoying. Moving to my Natasha Denona Camel palette, this is like the full-size eyeshadows 5-pan palette rather than the mini that's just a little guy of it. So my favorite shade in this palette is actually this guy here, the shade Safari in the Camel palette. It's a camel brown, it's a camel palette. So really, really love that shade though. It's almost like a cooler tone of the two, like more neutral than this guy. So I really love that shade there. So we moved to my Kaleidos palettes next. Again, Josh gave me these for my birthday last year. Again, have not used them as much as I feel like they need to be used, which is like a crying shame. I have too many eyeshadows. It's like that. If I ever want an eyeshadow palette, please like yell at me. I don't need them. I will never need another eyeshadow for like 20 years. But we go to the Futurism 1, which is my favorite Kaleidos palette that they've launched. This is just such a pretty color story. I love this. These are my tones, like me. Love it. Beautiful. Favorite shade, Glamora. Of course, it has to be like a greeny, olivey kind of shade. The swatch does not do it justice. The shade is so much prettier and it can get really impactful if I build it up. The swatch was very, very light on this, so it is a lot prettier than I feel like the swatch actually shows. But then we go to my least favorite in my Kaleidos palettes, which is the Futurism 2 Cyber Bronze. Just something, I just don't really reach for these kinds of tones. Like, I really, really want to be that girl who can wear like these cool reds. I'm not that kind of girl who feels like I can wear those reds. Maybe one day. That day has not come. My favorite shade is this guy here called Droid. It's just a beautiful, like warm, camel-y, but like caramel kind of color. It's just beautiful. I absolutely love that shade. So beautiful. And the Kaleidos matte formula is so buttery soft. It's just so good. The next is my Futurism 3. This was in my Pan Those Eyeshadows for 3-4 months. And this is what that palette looks like. A beautiful palette. Absolutely stunning palette. As you can see, I hit pan in one of the shades. It took me forever. Not my favorite shade in this palette. My favorite shade is actually this guy here called Light Year. It is just a beautiful, super pale, almost silver pink. I love that shade. I think it's absolutely beautiful. When I had this palette in my Pan Those Eyeshadows, I actually reached for that shade a decent amount. I reached for the blue a little bit more because the blue is out of my comfort zone. So I wanted to like get some extra usage on that if I rolled it in. So always thinking ahead with that Pan Those Eyeshadows. Reach for the shades that you don't like because maybe one day you'll have to pan them and that'll be awful for you. We move to the VR Neon, which is the 4th palette in the series. This palette is beautiful. Another one that's like centered around video game themes. This shade is so pretty. My favorite's this one though. This shade is called Glitch. It's that, again, a nuclear acid kind of green. It is just so pretty. I absolutely love it. Need to get more use out of this palette. Again, shocker, common theme. Low, you need to use your palettes more. Futurism 3. I saw a video on someone calling this the Taco Bell palette, and it's extremely funny because I've always thought that too, so I love that someone else is in my brain too. So this is what this guy is looking like. I mean, favorite shade is definitely going to be this shade here called Tron. It's just a beautiful, delicious, super insanely metallic, like in your face kind of shade. Absolutely beautiful. I don't get enough use out of this. The metallics in this palette feel different than the metallics and the shimmers in all of the other palettes. These ones are a little bit more crumbly, flaky, dry metallics, whereas the other metallics are very, very like wet feeling, like almost like malleable. I have yet to really reach into this palette as much as I should. Shocker. We're at the bottom of my stack, y'all. First one being my Going Coconuts palette by ColourPop. I think it'll shock people because I feel like this palette gets mixed opinions because of the shimmers in this. People think that they're too flaky. I don't mind a flaky shimmer. My favorite shade is this one, which is probably the worst culprit for people thinking it's flaky, but it's so pretty. I think the best way to describe it is like a shredded coconut kind of color. Like, it's absolutely beautiful. It's called Palm Reader. It's absolutely stunning. I think that it has like the right amount of white with the right amount of like goldy kind of beige shift to it. It's just pretty. It's just pretty. I really like that shade. Beautiful inner corner highlight. We go to my Bare Necessities palette, another one Josh got me for Valentine's Day, and same with the coconut palette. This was easy. I have known what my favorite shade in this palette was for a long time. That is this beautiful shade called Rumor. It is just so good. I love it. It's just so pretty. It's slightly cool toned, but like warm enough. It's just good. It's just good. Then we go to one of my favorite palettes of all time, which is my ColourPop Sailor Moon palette. This palette got a lot of negative reviews, I feel like, but Sailor Moon is bae, love this. I have some changes in mind. Spoiler for my 20 favorites in 2020. It's not done. It's not done yet. I just removed it. So my favorite shade in this palette is going to be Luna. It's just, I'm always attracted to these purples that have like a blue shift to them. I don't know why. I hate purple eyeshadow, but if a purple eyeshadow has blue, suddenly I love it. I don't know why it's like that. It's bizarre to me, but love that shade so much. So then we have some palettes that Haley gifted me, the Savannah and the Chocolates palette. First, we'll talk about the Savannah. This one was easy. I compared this to another palette that's in my collection, actually two of them. One I already swatched, one is coming up. My favorite shade in this one, it actually differs, this palette, to the dupe, the dupe of whatever this was duping. That sentence hurt. But my favorite shade in this palette is actually this like beautiful army green in the very top corner. Absolutely love this. It is so good. I compared it to my Subculture shade Destiny and then my Natasha Denona Safari. I don't know the shade off the top of my head. I think it might be Savannah. This shade just looks the best out of all of these army green tones that I have, and this is so good. This quality is actually remarkable. I am blown away with the quality of this palette. Absolutely love this. This would be another palette I would be totally down to pan. Let me know. Then we have the Profusion Chocolates palette, again, gifted by Haley. Thank you, love you, soul sister. You are the best. But this was easy. I actually have a 3 looks, 1 palette coming up on Thursday with this palette, which is kind of how I figured out what my favorite shade in this palette is. And the shade I incorporated quite a bit was actually Winter, and I love this shade. It really took my looks from like a 6 to like a 9. There's always room for improvement in my opinion, so like no look is a 10 for me, but my look went from like a 6 to a 9 at least. So stay tuned for Thursday for a couple 3 looks to be exact on this palette and my thoughts. Shameless plug. Shameless plug. Then we go to my Safari palette, which is, she's so good. I love this palette. I love this palette so much, which is why I love that Savannah palette. But this is this guy. I mean, they look the same. And this one just has shade names and has bigger pans. My favorite is different than the Savannah palette by C Color. My favorite shade is this guy here called Amara. It is so beautiful. It's like the perfect terracotta, almost a little pinky, like it's just so good. And Natasha Denona's matte formula is so buttery and creamy. I love this palette. Worth every penny of the $64.50 I spent on it. Now, I don't think any palette is worth $129. I just don't. I think that is astronomical when you can get a very comparable color story and formula for $8. $129 isn't hitting it for me, but $65 I could justify this. I have the last couple bits of my singles that I've purchased and then one last palette that's depotted. So let's go talk about my singles first. The first one is my Kristen Lee singles. I had, I think, 5 shades that I ended up buying from their shop. My favorite shade is this guy here. It looks very unimpressive, but it is a beautiful yellow, like very pale yellow, called Lemonade. It's absolutely stunning. It has like a green, like blue shift to it. It's gorgeous. I love this shade so much. Then we move to probably my favorite eyeshadow that I've bought this year and maybe in like ever. This might be my favorite eyeshadow that I bought ever, and that comes from Dandelions Co. I will have their Etsy link down below. This is the shade Dahlia. It is so gorgeous. This is like a perfect and better dupe of ABH Electric that was in the Subculture palette. The shade is so good. It's so beautiful. It's unbelievable. Kind of on the same wavelength of shades that I bought to try to dupe Electric out. I ended up buying this shade here from Glaminatrix. This is the shade Cloud 9. It's a little bit more gold than Electric and a little less like greeny shifty, but this shade is absolutely beautiful. This is a beautiful formula. Glaminatrix does have an extremely soft formula, so just if you purchase from them, it comes all the way from Australia. So it travels a long, long distance, and I mean, I fault nothing on the shadows. It's just transit, and some shadows are just softer. So these are just a little bit softer pressed than some of the other shadows that I've brought into my collection, but the payoff on them is remarkable. So the next palette is actually my Heavy Metals palette by Urban Decay. This guy here, this is all that's left of it. It was a pain to depot this. My favorite shade in the palette is actually this shade here, which is called Acoustic. It is just a beautiful, beautiful shade. It's very unique. It doesn't look like it would be really unique, but it actually has such an interesting undertone to it. It's almost like taupey. I don't have any like true like taupey kind of shadows like that. Absolutely beautiful. Really, really love it. Yeah. And that is all of my favorite eyeshadows. I will have like a picture up of both arms. It's the same arms. It's the same arm, but just both rounds of swatches on it. So you can really see what kind of colors I am drawn to. I actually haven't seen it, so I'm going to be very surprised when I look at the pictures together and really get an understanding. But based on my sheet, I'm like shocked with how many neutrals I have as like favorites. It's like a lot of neutrals with like a lot of pops of blue, mostly greens. The heart likes what it likes, right? So that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you would like to see my least favorite shades by palette. Let me know if you think I should do a Pan That palette next year, or like start it soon and like pan an entire eyeshadow palette. Like, how crazy would that be? Anyway, until next time, I hope you're staying healthy, staying sane, and staying safe, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye!